Recording.
Hey, Matt.
Hello, hello. How's it going?
It's going well. How about you?
Not bad. Is this the HBA office or is this the home office we're seeing?
This is my HBA office. I
Ah,
have a lovely visual of the Oregon coast. It's my favorite place.
oh, nice. Is the HBA over there off of like Bangy still, or is it in a different location?
It's still off of Bangy. Yeah, there might have been some updates to one or two of the floors since you've been here last, but the downstairs is used largely by our catering company. It's a separate company, but they service all of our events, or at least they did pre-COVID. So it's been remodeled down there. It's really nice.
I actually don't know that I've ever been there. I think I just knew that it was over there.
Okay.
But
this is Dave Carbon. Can you see me, hear me?
Yep, we can hear you,
yes,
Dave.
we hear you.
Okay.
We hear you
Good.
and see you both.
That's scary.
Yeah, Roseanne, which building is it actually in? I'm not sure I know.
So if you're standing at the Trader Joe's there in the parking lot on Bangy, and you look south, parallel to I-5, it's the first building you see.
Okay, so wasn't there like an interior design firm? I can't remember the name of it in there.
I'm not sure. It might have been before my time, but there is State of Oregon offices on the second floor, which is the entry-level floor that you enter on, and then HBA has the third floor, and then the first floor, which is kind of a daylight basement setup.
Okay. Well, anyway, looks like we've got 4 participants so far. I think we're expecting a couple more, so we'll hang tight for a few minutes anyway.
Long enough for me to go get like a surge of heat wave outside?
Yeah, so oddly enough, I'm actually in Phoenix, Arizona right now, and it's cooler here than it is there, which has to be like a first time ever type of thing.
Yeah, I think so.
And come to my house, Roseanne. It's about 107 inside.
Oh man.
Oh, I'm
Air
sorry.
conditioning is moving up the list.
What's moving up the list, did you say?
Air conditioning.
Oh, yeah. For sure. We survive at my house with a window unit typically. We have a walkout basement, and that stays fairly cool, 10 degrees cooler than whatever it is on the ground floor. And then the ground floor, we have a window unit, which usually does an adequate job of at least taking the edge off on the hottest days, and that's enough to survive in Portland, like Westland, whatever.
For sure.
But yeah, I don't know what it's like inside our house right now. Can't be good. Well, I've got 105 here. Certainly had hoped we'd see a few more. I guess we'll go ahead and jump in, and if folks come into the waiting room, then I'll let them in. So we'll officially, I guess, call the meeting to order then. I've got 106 on my watch. And I think Deborah, Roseanne, and Joe were all three on the last call. Dave, I think you had a conflict. So just to bring you up to speed really quickly, what we have accomplished is, aside from our previous conversations, which you've participated in, or I shouldn't say aside from, but in addition to our previous meetings and conversations, were you here, Dave, when Sean from the DLCD presented to us?
No.
Okay, so he kind of did a high-level overview of these housing-related bills, 2001 and 2003. For the most part, they don't apply to Estacada because we're too small. But it was a good primer for what will be expected of Estacada once we kind of grow up a little bit. And then he did take some time going through some housing development strategies, housing production strategies, and then referred us to a table, which I will show now, I suppose, real briefly before we come back to it here. Okay, so we looked at this document during that presentation very briefly. Where'd everyone go? Okay, and then last meeting we spent considerable time in this document looking at sections A, B, and C. We had hoped to make it further, but then we decided to go ahead and have this meeting today where we'll review sections D, E, and F, and then pretty much call it a wrap for this ad hoc committee. We'll meet once more to simply review the final draft of our recommendations and then adopt those and kind of adjourn. So it should be, like a 20-minute meeting type of a thing. From there, our recommendations will go to City Council, and they will also be handed off to a consultant who's leading the city now through a full in-depth housing needs analysis. And they've also been hired not only to do that analysis piece, but to also develop for the city and in partnership with the city a housing production strategy across types of housing. And that's to be pretty in-depth, looking at the development code, the zoning map, and other programs and initiatives that might spur the types of housing that Estacada needs most. So that's the really quick and dirty where we've been. Before I stop sharing this, how is this print size for you all on the table? Is it microscopic?
It's fine for me. I have it up on my other screen, so I'm okay.
Yeah, it works for
Okay,
me as
how is
well.
I have it up on a different screen.
Okay. Dave, I see you leaning in. If you lean in, is it okay for you?
I just put on my other glasses and it's fine.
Okay, sounds good. I'm glad we're all able to find something that works. Check the waiting room here. I don't think we've got anyone else waiting. Okay, so before we move ahead then into the work of our meeting, I'll jump over to the minutes from our last meeting. For at least part of the time, we had the following folks present, and then those that are absent. I believe Heath had to jump off early, and maybe even Ben, but nonetheless, those were the folks that were on board when we started. And then, as I mentioned, we looked at our recommendations and added to those using this DLCD, what I'm calling a menu of options. And rather than go into detail in the minutes of all the discussion, I kept it pretty brief and just said that we added 2 and that those changes and additions can be found in the next version, version 4 of our recommendations, which I will pull up in a moment. But that's the way I captured the minutes. If that's not objectionable to anyone, then I guess I would look for a motion to adopt these minutes.
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes from the meeting on June, what was the date?
16.
On June 16th.
I'll second the motion.
All right. And so with that, we have a motion from Roseanne Johnson and a second from Dave Carbonneau. Those in favor of adopting minutes may say so.
Aye.
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 Okay, and I think that was unanimous, and so the motion passes to adopt the minutes. I'm noting here that we have 9 members on this committee, and we have 4 present here. So
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how this would apply to an ad hoc committee, but I know in our official commissions and especially city council, a majority constitutes a quorum, a minority would not. So here's what I would propose, and we can't even really make a decision, I guess, technically. I don't know. Okay, here's what I would propose is maybe we move ahead with the 4 attendees that we have here, knowing that we can't adopt our recommendations until the last meeting. And so they'll just be suggestions for the time being. If we don't have a quorum next meeting, then we won't be able to adopt our recommendations. But I surely hope that we'll have everyone, but at least 5 members. Does that seem reasonable to everyone?
It does.
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
I hate to slow down the progress we've made by saying that we can't continue for lack of a quorum. So I think we'll move forward doing our work and leave it up to the rest of the members to catch up in between meetings, and then we won't be able to take a vote next meeting without a quorum. So we may have to actually next meeting retake the vote to adopt those minutes that we just voted on as well. But these are technicalities that will work out. So here's our menu. Let me actually jump to our revised recommendations. Okay. So we added to these last meeting. I won't go line item by line item, but we added a few things under section A, which has to do with zoning and code changes. Dave, I'm just noting in gray things that the city actually already has on the books.
Okay.
Section B has to do with the regulatory environment, trying to clear a path for development. And we did add some things there, which you can see clarified a little bit. We looked at financial incentives and discussed those, which was section C. And now that brings us to D. So one of the things that we talked about was SDCs. And I tried to clean up the language to reflect our discussion in that meeting. Specifically, we talked about SDC. I mean, generally, I think our recommendation is to have a consultant really take a close look at how those can be more, I guess, fair, or in some cases, maybe even tilt the scales in the favor of multifamily housing in order to try and incentivize that development. But more specifically, we talked about potentially waiving or reducing SDCs for projects that are in close proximity to parks that already exist. And then we talked about transportation SDCs potentially being tied to required parking spaces rather than some engineering formula, which I think can tend to maybe call for, at least in some cases, an unnecessary amount of parking. So section D then, again, I noted this last meeting, I'll say it again, a construction excise tax technically falls under section D. And this group early on sort of made the decision that that was, at least at this time, not what this group wanted to recommend to council. Let me see, I'm getting a text message. I don't know if it's someone from on this committee. Let me see. Ben says he's in the waiting room. Why am I not seeing that? Here we go. Okay, so we do have Ben with us now. Let me then jump over to the menu of options, and then we'll continue our work. So as I was prepping for this meeting, this section is, okay, so you see financial resources. And I think by and large, at least in some of the cases here, these apply, or these are things that a developer might apply for, rather than, say, a public agency. That might not necessarily be true of CDBG, but it could be. Some of these other things, I think it's more true. But I think what I'd like to do in order to keep this meeting moving is to basically maybe pause for a moment and have you all, rather than me, take a look at this and maybe suggest the things that stand out to you that ought to be included in our recommendations, rather than going item by item, which took quite a bit of time last meeting. I also think that it might be acceptable to simply call out something more general, to say, you know, in our recommendations that we recommend that, I don't know, just financial incentives generally, or what is this called? Financial resources. You know, maybe that the city develop or make accessible to developers a list of potential financial resources that they might call upon as they develop a project in Estacada. That'd be the most general recommendation we could make. So if there are specific items here that you think we ought to include, for example, like forming a new TIF district, that might be something this group might want to recommend or not. But for more general things, federal programs, county programs, et cetera, CDBG, the low-income housing tax credits, I don't know that we need to call those out specifically, but I'm going to stop talking now. I'd like to hear what you have to say on this category D, financial resources.
So I would just say that, yeah, many of these things, like you said, are tools that a developer, a nonprofit, or even a profit developer would use in order to build affordable housing. So I don't know if there's anything that we need to spell out directly, because, like, yeah, the low income tax credit, the home program, all of those are just the vouchers, the site-based vouchers. Those are all just tools that a developer will use in order to make their project feasible.
So maybe what our recommendation, oh, sorry, Dave, you wanted to say something?
Gonna chime in on that, and I agree, these are all tools that a developer would use. I'm just having some recent experience with LIHTC and other programs coming out of Oregon Housing and Community Services. We're finding that the size of the project actually matters, particularly with LIHTC, where you have a tremendous amount of overhead, and if you don't have a lot of units, they don't even want to look at it. So we've been looking at projects over in Madras. We got it up to around 25 units, but that was all the community really needed. But it kind of fell below that threshold where LIHTC would even be interested. So just a condition that needs to be thought about as any developer goes into this. Is this a place that actually could put together a project the size that would be able to attract these other sources of funding?
Okay.
And the other thing we did is, the other thing we're doing in Madras is I'm going with modular for a variety of reasons. One is we don't necessarily have a lot of resources over there that we can call on for general contractors. And secondly, we've tried to avoid getting caught up in a lot of the prevailing wage issues. And sometimes modular gives us an avenue to work around those things. So it just takes a little more creativity as how you put all these pieces together. But it works if you can make the right combination of how we build, who we're building for, and where we're building.
And so what I hear you saying is that it's probably site specific and project specific and potentially even developer specific as to which of these tools would even be relevant. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and it's not to say that these aren't great programs. It's just that they're kind of geared for a particular type of investment.
Okay.
We've been doing some scattered site to try to get, if we have 4 units or 4 projects and each of them are 20, trying to put that together where you can get to a level of units that where these begin to really work.
So maybe what we can do then is to make a recommendation just that the city staff clearly develop a web page and maybe a flyer to go with it that is easily given to developers that lists out these potential tools that they could tap into. They may already be aware of some of them, but in an ideal situation, maybe they would learn about something they weren't already aware of.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. The other thing I'd throw in here, and we've been working over with churches, and I don't know if maybe this conversation came up in a previous meeting, but we've signed up with the Redmond diocese over in Redmond for all those churches, Catholic churches that are on Highway 97 from Klamath Falls at the south up to the Dalles in the north. But I don't know if that was something that may be of interest to kind of, I don't know even where it fits, but it's more of how do you create different kind of business partnerships that might enable you to work around and take advantage of some of these, but maybe others where you can actually leverage the land, take some equity position out of the land, so that it's a real opportunity, and I think it's worth exploring. But again, it may be more who you partner with as opposed to how you position some of these financing options.
So I think that's something we can maybe add as well. Section F here, which we'll get to last, talks about sort of customized strategies or jurisdiction-specific strategies, and that's where I've listed a potential partnership with the Housing Authority of Clackamas County. We could also make a note there that the city might explore potential partnerships with faith-based organizations. I know, for example, there are several churches on the outskirts of town who have pretty large parcels where they only occupy a small portion of it with their building, perhaps there's an ability to develop housing, for example, on the other part of their property that they're just not really utilizing otherwise.
Yeah, some of the other agencies too, you might take into consideration. We've had good meetings with Valerie over at the senior center, and they have the 12 acres. You know, they're not necessarily thinking they want to do anything, but they all acknowledge the fact that many of their seniors are running the risk of being homeless, and I think they want to try to find solutions. So it may just be a broader effort to include other agencies that might have a vested interest in providing housing.
Okay. All right. I think I can add some notes to that end in our recommendations. Let me, before we move on past section D, ask maybe specifically about a couple of these that maybe are more public agency centric. We've already talked about a construction excise tax and said, no, thank you, at least for now. I mentioned a moment ago, but I guess I'll mention again, perhaps the formation of a new TIF district, or as Oregon calls them, an urban renewal district. The city where we, at least as staff, have talked about this as maybe a possibility, pending political feasibility and cooperation from special districts, is the former mill site. So there's 90 acres in town that is now unoccupied and dormant, owned by RSG Forest Products. They're willing to transact, but also not interested in actively marketing the property. But this is a 90-acre area that could potentially be its own urban renewal area, and an area ripe for really thoughtful development tied into the rest of the city's transportation and other infrastructure. It's
really in a nice.
located in a good. Sorry, Deborah, what were you saying?
I'm just saying it's also in such a nice location, both in terms of transit, but also in terms of just what that site has to offer in terms of indoor, outdoor spaces and congeniality with the existing Whispering Pines unit that's up there and that kind of upper town area.
So yeah, agreed. So you know, there's only 4 of us again. I guess Ben had to drop off, or maybe he went into an area of patchy reception. But shall we recommend, or at least ask the council to consider the formation of an urban renewal area on the former mill site? Explore the idea, perhaps commission a feasibility study, for example.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense.
I do too.
Yes.
And
Okay,
there's a
so
lot that could fit there.
So unless anyone tells me otherwise, what I will put in the next draft is our recommendation is not necessarily to form the TIF district, but rather to recommend that the council explore it through something like a feasibility study to look at financial feasibility as well as political feasibility. Sound okay? Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. The other things that I think we'd potentially be interested in, but I really consider, or I would be concerned about our ability to actually do it financially, would be things like vouchers, eviction protection. So this isn't saying that these aren't worthwhile programs, but just that the city would probably not be in a financial position to support such programs, at least not in its current size.
You know, Matt, I also think that there's enough resources with the county that already covers a lot of these things that the city wouldn't have to do that specifically.
Yeah. Okay.
Worth
Let me just
Sorry.
Deborah, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Deborah again. Would it be worth on that general recommendation we were talking about earlier, given that many of these things are things that either county and or developers will have to seek out? Just sort of a general recommendation that the city do all within its power, whether it be connecting to partnerships or connecting to other resources or writing letters of support, that the council and the city do all it can to support such efforts.
Sure,
So-
I'd be happy to include that. Everyone on board with that?
Yes.
Can't hurt, I don't think. Okay, I think I've got what I need for this section then. And so just to recap, we'll recommend that the city form basically like a website and flyer that lists out these potential developer incentives and programs. Secondly, we just talked about this, the TIF district feasibility study. And then thirdly, just on a more general note, say that the city should support to the greatest extent possible partners, nonprofit partners, public agency partners, partners of any variety as they seek out these and implement these sort of support programs or grants, whatever the opportunities may be. Okay, section E, tax exemption and abatement. So you can't see this on your screen. I've got it up on mine. This is where a vertical housing development zone would fall. We have that now on the books. Dave, for your information, it became effective weeks ago. And that's just in the D zone right now, our downtown zone, which for those of you intimately familiar with Estacada, that would really be our downtown core. So everything kind of below that topographical ridge, including the commercial area on the river side of the highway. So there's residential on the river side of the highway, but there's also sort of a commercial-y area where you would find the Cazadero restaurant, the bait and tackle store, Sparky's Pizza, etc. That's the commercial area I'm thinking of. So that area is in our D downtown zone as well. And that's where our vertical housing development zone is included. Roseanne, in a previous meeting, you had kind of suggested that maybe we should nudge the powers that be in the direction of expanding that vertical housing zone to other sort of high opportunity parts of the city. I'd like to, I guess, open up that topic for discussion.
Well, I seem to recall that when the Clackamas County Commission came and had a tour from your staff, I believe you and some of your colleagues, as well as your Mayor Drinkwine and possibly some other city councilors, there was a discussion about, one particular site being feasible or suitable, just kind of from preliminary analysis, very preliminary analysis for an affordable housing project. And I don't believe that particular site was ended up, moving forward in feasibility, but I do remember that it was outside of the downtown vertical housing development zone that was about to be approved by council. And so the idea that I had suggested was, if there were to be a site that, seemed amenable to both the county and the city, that perhaps the city could expand or apply another VHDZ to an area that the county was interested in partnering with the city on, to make it more attractive from a financial point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that site was necessarily ruled out. It was just kind of determined at that meeting that the timing wasn't quite right yet because of, again, as we've talked about previously, that the county housing authority kind of needs to free up some capital that's currently tied up in existing assets before they could do anything out here.
Mm-hmm.
So that site, I think, is still very much so on the table. It's just
Okay.
that the timing isn't quite right yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I will say though, Matt, another developer has come forward to the county and may be interested in it as well. So
Yeah, I
It's
think
not
they
off-
reached out to me
yeah.
via email.
Good. Is this Bridge Meadows?
That sounds right.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that site, and then, you know, adjacent to that site is another mixed use commercial residential zone. And so perhaps our recommendation ought to be that after, I don't know, some sort of trial period with this vertical housing zone just downtown, that the city ought to explore expanding to these other uptown areas where the city would like to see affordable and or market rate multifamily housing.
Agreed.
Okay.
Is there, and I don't know the site that you guys are talking about necessarily, and I don't necessarily need to, but I'm looking at E1 on the list, and I'm thinking of the land that the community center owns, that they
Okay.
might be interested in developing some additional senior housing. Would there be any of these tax exemption or abatement programs like E1 that might be of interest to them as a incentive for them to move a little faster?
So I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but it's hard for me to foresee a scenario where the community center actually develops that property themselves. But the site that we're talking about right now actually is the community center property that you're thinking of, Deborah. And
Okay,
so where they could probably make the most meaningful contribution toward a project would probably be either a land discount or a straight up land donation
Yeah,
in order toward a affordable housing and or senior housing development project. That's where they could really move the needle.
Yeah, we've had conversations with the community center on that property, the 12 acres, I'm assuming you're talking about.
right.
Yeah,
That
it's
they-
a River Mill and the old highway, Eagle Creek
Yeah.
Road.
Just one other option for a project like that, and we've done this with other churches and other organizations, we actually lease the land. And that gives a stream of revenue to the community center or the church or whomever it might be. But it gives the developing partner the opportunity to proceed with the piece of land that they've secured, even though it's in the form of a lease as opposed to an outright ownership. And it's also in this case where you have 12 acres, it doesn't necessarily have to be the whole thing. You could carve out an acre or two to that would be suitable for development for an affordable housing, particularly with older adults, low income older adults. So that's kind of the concept that we've been working on, and had some just initial conversations with the senior center on that.
Okay. So maybe I mean, we can't speak on behalf of the community center, but what we could add into our recommendations is to try and just encourage the city to act as a facilitator and, what's the right word? Not agitator, but the entity that's sort of nudging the community center in the direction of partnering with someone that can really do something with that property.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes into some previous comments you made about how do we bring all these organizations together and how do we encourage them to think a little bit more openly to some of these ideas.
Okay. So maybe what I'll do is just include some of this type of language that we're discussing right now. Actually not in section E, but rather in section F, where we're talking about partnership, potentially with the housing authority, potentially with other organizations. I'll just, add notes on this idea of really keeping the conversation with the community center open and moving towards something. With someone, I think the city and the community, for that matter, we're not just talking about us as a public agency, but the community is probably pretty ambivalent as to who develops that property, whether it's the housing authority or whether it's a nonprofit or heck, even a for-profit developer. We just want to see it do something besides sit, I guess.
I also think it's kind of low-hanging fruit because there's not too many people in the community are going to object to senior housing. And so if we could somehow develop that property as integrated, so it's not just senior housing, but it has other options within it, I think it might be an easier sell to some of the others, potential naysayers in the community.
Okay. Okay, I think I can capture that. And of course, you all have an opportunity to review what I've written and comment on it before we adopt it in our final meeting. So we did, in the context of talking about vertical housing, I think in maybe our first meeting, Roseanne mentioned these other programs with multiple unit tax exemptions. Rather than make a separate recommendation, I think what I would do is probably just lump that together with what we were just talking about with regard to vertical housing, to just say that the city ought to look at either an expansion of our vertical housing zone or one of these other programs in those high opportunity areas.
Yeah, and then you can just, put in parentheses that there are, or you can just add another sentence that says there are specific programs designated, tax abatement programs designated for multiple unit or multi-dwelling or multi-family, however you want to put it. And then there's separate ones for single dwelling or, and they apply to townhomes as well. And I have personal experience with that. So the multi and the MUPTI are definitely for your more traditional multi-dwelling, multi-family. But Holte can be for some limited attached product as well, like townhomes.
Okay. And by the way, for those of you who either don't have in front of you or don't remember, I already have the Holte home buyer opportunity limited tax exemption included in our recommendations. And so I guess we would just do a separate recommendation that would capture vertical housing and these multiple unit programs.
Perfect.
Differently. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. We don't have a federal opportunity zone in Estacada, which kind of blows my mind, but that's what it is. Property tax relief for income qualified homeowners. That would definitely have to be a discussion with the county. Yeah. Is there anything anyone else would like to add under this tax exemption and abatement category before we move on to F?
Could you elaborate a little bit on your comment about opportunity zones? I recall that there was an opportunity zone pitched to the Estacada at one time about a lumber manufacturing capability, but
opportunity zones made available through the federal government, I believe, were designated by the governor's office, and they did not elect to cite an opportunity zone in the Estacada urban growth boundary.
Okay.
So,
that refreshed my.
Yeah. So, that's a whole other tirade we can go on. How does Northwest Portland have an opportunity zone and Estacada doesn't? I guess we can't go into that right now. It's not useful to us, but all that to say, we do not have a designated opportunity zone in the UGB.
Okay, thank you.
And it wasn't because Estacada turned it down. It was because it was never offered. Okay, finally, and I think category F is almost kind of woven to a degree into some of our existing recommendations, but again, this is where we've captured a partnership with the Housing Authority. I mentioned I would expand upon that to talk about a partnership that might involve the community center or other nonprofit or even for-profit developers. But there are other interesting ideas here, like the city perhaps land banking, perhaps facilitating the development of a community land trust. Again, I don't know that any of these strike me as like easy or low-hanging fruit, but they're still things that may be worthy of consideration. So again, I guess I'll try and shut up for now and just have you all take a look at this set of recommendations and see if something stands out to you that you feel like the city ought to, or that we ought to include in our recommendations to the council.
I guess I have a question, Matt, for related to F7. When staff and then subsequently city council adopted the zoning code changes, I think it was back in 2019. Did you guys incorporate kind of any sort of external outreach on what that meant for smaller developers in the area? Or I'm just trying to find things that like maybe you could say that you've already done, and since it was successful, you could build on any of those things you've already done as a result of those zoning code changes.
Yeah, there was not any sort of concerted or organized effort to get the word out to the development community about our land use changes. That's certainly something that could be done, probably should be done. It all is often a question of just finite staff time and how it gets allocated, and that just was something that didn't get done. There was, we're seeing, I suppose, I don't know if the right word is enough, but we're seeing some anyway, market reaction to those changes. And that's just happened by virtue of people kind of paying attention of their own volition. But yeah, we might see more activity if we did have more of an externally focused PR campaign to say, hey, we've made these changes and here's how they might affect your decision making as you seek for new projects.
Mm-hmm. I
Is that
imagine
kind of what you're thinking?
you do have a web page for those, like a kind of a consolidated web page, maybe for like the most recent zoning code changes, the VHDZ. That might be something to consider. That could be kind of a passive form of education rather than additional staff resources.
Okay, I like that idea. We do have a web page for the VHDZ. I don't know that we have anything besides the dry, inaccessible, like planning commission hearing meeting web pages that ever sort of consolidated and made the changes easily accessible to someone who is interested in learning about them. So that's probably a good recommendation, is to just consolidate all of these things that the city is doing and to talk about them in an accessible manner to, I guess, the community generally, but maybe specifically the development community who might have the most interest in them.
Correct. Yes, I think that would be a great idea. Yeah, consolidating all the recent things the city has done to encourage a variety of housing types within your city limits. And you could link, the thing, like you could link the zoning code amendments, right? You don't have to actually explain them on the webpage. You could just say what they are and link them. Similar to the VHDZ, you could link it, could explain it briefly, and then for more information, click here. And then I know your press release about the VHDZ and what the media wrote up about it is also just really good, kind of consolidated information too, that you could start with potentially.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put that in there, that the council should direct staff to spend time doing all of the stuff we've been discussing just now.
As far as, I have one more comment.
Yep.
As far as F6, preserving safe, affordable manufactured homes, do you have any data around how many manufactured homes you have within city limits? And has there been any previous or current efforts to preserve those, or any programs to, like, help with maintenance or operations of those areas?
I don't know if we have any hard data on number of units, but it would be pretty easy to do, just because, yeah, we could kind of walk or put, look on a map and just count them up. But then to answer your question about has the city done anything to try and preserve those, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so kind of leaving it more to the market. If the manufactured home park owner would hypothetically, want to sell in X number of years, then it could be, there's nothing that would prohibit that or preclude that from happening. Is that correct?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm. So obviously that's a policy decision, whether to put those kind of enforcement preservation mechanisms on. And because I want to be pro housing no matter what, I don't want to say one way or the other. But I do want to encourage that if there were, for when manufactured homes do exist, they are like a, kind of first entry point, an entry level type of house, or a, fixed income type of housing option, which there's definitely a role for that. And so to the extent that they are preserved, they should also not be counted in the housing needs analysis as vacant or partially vacant in this case.
Okay. Okay. So then do
I think just like the recommendation would be to ensure that any affordable housing preservation efforts are connected intellectually, to the HNA or the HCA. Are you guys calling it capacity or a needs analysis?
I think we're calling it a HNA, a needs analysis.
Needs analysis. Okay. So just making that connection that they are related when you're doing the HNA, manufactured home sites technically are potentially vacant usually because of the value of the structures on the land. But maybe just taking a closer look at that.
Okay. I think I can capture that in the notes and recommendations. Are you going a step further, or is this group going a step further to say that the city should proactively try and prevent market forces from redeveloping those sites?
I from HBA's perspective, I'm not going to say that, but to the extent that the city feels that that's important to do, that should be reflected in the housing needs analysis, is my HBA recommendation. So, but no, I'm not recommending that you make it impossible to redevelop manufactured home sites.
I wouldn't recommend to make it impossible either, but I wonder if there's a way that we could make it ensure that some preservation of those units are maintained at affordable levels, either for rent or sale, so that if it were to be redeveloped, it had to be presenting the same number of units at affordable or current levels or something of that nature. Is that possible? Something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. Dave, you have a thought?
Yeah, I think that's exactly spot on. I think you have to at least preserve that affordable element. Not to suggest that there won't be many that try to come in and develop something that's at the higher end, but we're really talking about, in many cases, in these parks, people that can only afford about $500 a month in rent.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think you have to keep those opportunities open.
So I'm getting kind of outside my realm of expertise here, but the only thing I can think of that would add such restrictive covenants on a property would be a deed restriction. And is that what we're talking about here, or is there a different mechanism?
Well, it would probably come to the surface through some sort of zone. If there was a rezoning associated with it, that would be a point where the city could weigh in and ask the question, what are we going to do with the existing residents?
Okay. All right. I'll see. I'll listen to this discussion again as I go and do the minutes and see if I can adequately capture at least the sentiment of what's being discussed here, that the city could explore either policy or some other mechanism by which affordability of current manufactured home sites could be preserved in the event of redevelopment.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. All right. The city doesn't really, I'm looking at F12 here. The city doesn't really have surplus land.
Darn.
The only thing that I could think of there would be the current, yeah, that wouldn't work though from zoning. Never mind. I'm not even going to go down that path. Anything else here in this category that stands out to folks?
So I feel like there was, and this is a question for Mr. Clackamas County. I think that there's a community land trust model that was either in the works, or again, I'm asking for to be educated as well. And so I'm wondering if there's like an opportunity to learn about the Clackamas County's pursuit of a community land trust, specifically for housing, and how that could work either at the city of Estacada's impetus or a combined city county community land trust. So that's kind of a comment and a question. Joe,
you know, Roseanne, I've never heard of that with the county. I don't know. It could be in community development, which is a different department than the housing authority,
okay.
But I could do some checking on that for the group.
Yeah, I remember particularly when Commissioner Humberston was in elected office, that he talked a lot about community land trust model, and it was more for commercial and industrial purposes, but doesn't mean that the similar tenants aren't there for housing purposes as well. So that would be really interesting to be able to at least get educated on.
Yeah, let me do some checking.
Okay, we can, and so again, this is kind of the lens through which we should look at this stuff. We can't always say, hey, city council, you should do this, but we can tell the city council, we recommend that you charge staff to do X, Y, or Z. And so our time is finite. Maybe that translates into additional staff. That's for them to determine and for the city manager to determine. But a recommendation as it regards community land trust may be to just recommend that city staff spend time researching and I guess just understanding and then educating the city council on how a community land trust might be able to help the affordable housing landscape in the Estacada UGB, and just kind of leave it in broad terms like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could even be, directing staff to work with a subject matter, to bring a subject matter expert for a joint planning commission city council presentation on community land trusts, something like that.
Yeah. There's actually a really interesting nonprofit out there, or I guess they're more of a think tank or a policy think tank called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, ILSR. And at least I believe it's them. It may be another similar group, but nonetheless, they have, I believe, quite a bit of accessible information all about how communities can develop and implement a community land trust in order to make an affordable housing option.
Mm-hmm.
So there, yeah, it may just be a matter of tapping into resources that are already out there and then bringing those to council. Anyway, okay, I think I can capture that. All right, this is the last page of on the menu here for section F. I think we kind of already talked about this a little bit, potentially partnering with faith-based organizations who may have land holdings.
Did talk about it. Is it captured anywhere on our?
Well, yeah, I think what I said there is just that in conjunction with a potential partnership with Housing Authority or the community center, we would also include there mentioning a potential partnership with faith-based organizations to see where opportunities may exist.
Yeah. I think this would be great. I mean, there's a number of good examples in our region, even, and in our greater metropolitan area, including Portland in that, of faith-based groups who have done this. And I think it's an interesting model. I think people don't like, I would love to do something like this with the food bank, but I have no idea how to go about it. I think that might be true also of faith-based organizations and the community center, and providing some sort of supportive understanding and learning about how we could navigate all of this very unusual language and areas of regulation for us would be super helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
Capture that, but it sounds like we are capturing.
It probably comes in a lot of shapes and forms, but I guess the idea that comes most quickly to my mind is, take, for example, Mayor Dodrell's church, Estacada First Baptist.
Yeah.
They've got quite a chunk of property. And so the easiest sort of, you mentioned low-hanging fruit before, probably the easiest thing they could do is carve off a chunk of their land and just, donate it as an affordable housing site if there were someone ready and willing to develop it.
But how would they? I think they want to retain ownership and have that be part of their mission, right? So
that's, what we've done with the leases, it's kind of a win-win situation, is that they still own the property, but we're making improvements on their property and they receive compensation in the form of an annual lease payment. That's a win-win because many churches are even struggling to keep their doors open. And so they need some monetary value that can be derived, and that's the one that's probably the easiest to work with, is just a land lease.
That's what I was going to say. Is that what you're referring to as a land lease?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I can put together something to that end there, specifically in talking about faith-based organizations, maybe identify sites and especially willing partners who may be looking for additional revenue streams and a way to support the community both.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, and then I guess there's Z, just these custom options, but I think that, again, I feel like we've kind of woven that into some of our discussions of what's appropriate for Estacada, or at least opportune. Are there other ideas that, before we conclude, that somehow fall outside these 6 categories that we ought to be capturing?
So Matt, I think I mentioned this last time, but having some sort of state legislative update on new housing provisions that Estacada could potentially take advantage of. Like you guys were just talking about faith-based organizations being able to site housing on their property or in their building structures. I believe that those provisions were expanded this legislative session with a couple different bills, and two come to my mind, which is Senate Bill 8 and then House Bill 2006. So Senate Bill 8 definitely involves, allowing for housing, affordable housing in particular on, non-residential uses. So effectively commercial and faith-based institution properties. And then House Bill 2006, I haven't read the whole bill, but it's basically, I think it was the they call it the super siting shelters bill. And I don't even know if it would apply to Estacada. My sister organization handles all that stuff, but we did get an update on a lot of the housing bills this past weekend now that the legislative session is over. And I just would recommend that all cities, but particularly Estacada, since you guys were wanting more multifamily and a variety of housing options, looking at, all these ways that housing can be sited in different use and different zones.
Okay. As made, as required or as made attractive?
As allowed.
Yeah, as allowed. Okay.
Yeah, as allowed by recent state legislation.
Okay. Yeah, and that might be another opportunity for us to maybe call on DLCD to come out as a subject matter expert and maybe present, not to this group, but maybe to council or the HNA advisory committee, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and if DLCD doesn't know exactly, they might refer you to like OHCS. They might have the best point of contact from OHCS. I think that might be more relevant.
Okay. All right. Well, I will plan to capture our discussion today then in the final iteration of our draft recommendations. Again, those, let's see here. The document I'm referring to is this one. So I will add 2 based on our discussion today. We'll review that next meeting and hopefully adopt it. I'm hoping that someone from this group can represent the committee in presenting our recommendations to council. Theoretically, staff could do that, and I'm not opposed to it. I suppose it just feels better in some way if an actual committee member plays that role. I know some councils or commissions can be sensitive to things that are entirely staff driven as opposed to something that actually bubbles up as something that the community wants. Mm-hmm. So I guess that'd be the main reason why I see it as being perhaps better if a community member presents these findings as opposed to staff. Maybe we can talk about that next meeting. Deborah, think about it specifically.
I don't feel confident enough on a lot of this terminology and language to feel like I could present it intelligently. So I don't know the best bet, but I wonder if Ben or Heath would be.
Okay, yeah, that's understandable. And yeah, maybe we could look to Ben or Heath to play that role. I don't know that the task would necessarily be going through each of these recommendations with the council. Rather, I think it would be, and thank you for saying what you said, because that prompts me to better describe what I guess I'd be hoping for. It would just be someone, a member of this group, to basically say, here, city council, here are our recommendations. Here's what we did in order to get to this point. We met 5 times. We had a subject matter expert from DLCD come and speak to us. we looked at this menu of housing production strategies section by section and determined which items were most relevant to our community. And based on our conversations, this is what we've come up with, and we hope that you take it to heart and direct staff accordingly. And that's kind of it, 5 minutes type deal. So you wouldn't need to be an expert on each of these items necessarily.
So Matt and Deborah, I have a proposal. I did this same exact thing with the Clackamas County's Housing Affordability and Homelessness Task Force a couple of years ago. And what the county administrator had us do was he had 3 of us volunteer, and then we went over kind of a loose script ahead of time. So maybe a proposal could be like, Matt, you could maybe put into some talking points what you just said. And we could highlight like 3 or 4 of the, we could even just go through like the category. We could just list categories and then give a couple examples, not of each category, just, here's the categories we came up with. And then here's just 2 sample recommendations. And then, we could have, it could be like Deborah and another person. And I'm happy to do it, but I know HBA, sometimes has a reputation of being all about the developers, and we're trying to like remedy that, year over year, that we really do care about all types of housing, and we have members that build all types of housing. But I agree, like Deborah, you're very eloquent, and I would be very supportive of, Deborah talking through some of those points or another individual.
All right, I'll consider. Thank you. Maybe Ryan. Just thinking.
We don't want to twist anyone's arm, but so perhaps for next meeting, in addition to the final iteration of our recommendations, I can work on what Roseanne just recommended. What is the actual ask, and that might make folks feel a little bit more comfortable with volunteering. So thank you for that recommendation.
Yeah, and let's do ask the larger group, assuming we get them.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Well, any final thoughts before we adjourn then today's meeting? Okay. I'll just thank you all for your participation. I know everyone's real busy. And I hope to see you at our final meeting, where again, we'll just adopt this and pick some volunteers. So thanks very much. And we'll adjourn at 2:13 p.m.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Thank you.